Sonoma Land Trust is your host tonight. We are a local nonprofit that protects land in Sonoma County for everyone's benefit. We've been doing this work since 1976 and have protected nearly 60,000 acres in the county so far. We accomplish our work through the generosity of our members and contributors. So thanks to all of you out there who are helping us to protect beautiful Sonoma County for future generations. As we pursue our mission of conserving land in Sonoma County, I want to recognize that we stand upon the unceded ancestral lands of many indigenous peoples. We honor their knowledge, care, and stewardship of this special place across the ages, and acknowledge the deep and lasting damage that colonization and genocide have inflicted upon them. We embrace our responsibility at Sonoma Land Trust to learn from and protect their cultural and traditional connections to the land. Now, for tonight's presentation, I would like to introduce a friend and someone who I personally look up to. Beatriz Guerrero Auna is a trailblazing health and equity planner focused on community engagement, environmental justice, and climate change. She is currently City of Richmond's Transformative Climate Communities Project Coordinator. Beatriz's passion is cementing her as a leading voice in environmental justice in the Bay Area. She earned her master's in city planning from the University of California, Berkeley, with a concentration in environmental planning and healthy cities. Ms. Guerrero Auna is focused on policy development, implementation, and evaluation to achieve health equity. She has worked for local and federal governments in Mexico and the United States, including Mexico City and Santa Rosa, California. We are honored to have you tonight, Beatriz. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Neil. I really appreciate the introduction. Good evening, everyone. As Neil mentioned, my name is Beatriz Guerrero Auna. I am really excited to be here today with all the people who are joining this webinar to talk about the connection in between climate change, health, and social equity. I know this conversation was branded as environmental justice, and I want to clarify that environmental justice can be a complicated term to use. So I really prefer to use climate change, health, and social equity when we're talking about environmental justice, and we'll talk more about it during the conversation. I also want to say that about the connection itself, I would like to talk about the comprehensive approach that we can take when we're trying to empower equity priority communities and foster social urban environments. When we talk about equity priority communities, we're talking mostly about vulnerable communities, and we'll define this a little bit more in detail, so you know why are we phrasing this concept in this particular way. But first, I would really like to thank Trust for Public Land for the amazing work that they do, but also for the partnerships that we have fostered in the past while I was working for Sonoma and the city of Santa Rosa, as well for the invitation that they extended to me today. Thank you, Ingrid, and thank you, Neil. I really appreciate you and your team. Second, I would like to say that the content that I am presenting today is based on my knowledge and my experience working as an urban planner in the field, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the opinions and beliefs of the organizations that I've worked for. And I am a public employee, but I am today I'm presenting on my behalf and not as a public employee, board representative, or volunteer from any other organization. That said, third and last thing before we start the presentation, I bring a government perspective today because that's where I've been working the majority of my life. And my opinions and experiences are biased by my perspective as a government employee, but also as a woman, as a Latina, as an immigrant who's bilingual and bicultural, and a person who embodies a rich composition of identities that shape my perspectives. And I want to clarify this, as well as the interactions that I have with the communities that I work for. And I also consider myself an interpreter, a bridge builder, and a team player who is skillful at navigating and bridging cultural and linguistic divides that often exist. And so I am someone who's dedicated to leverage these qualities to drive positive change and empower communities to thrive. And I want to say I have a really deep commitment to social and racial equity. That said, I would like to start the presentation for tonight. Hopefully everyone who's joining tonight is already here, and I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully, you can see it. I hope I'm sharing it all right. I'm gonna stop my, there we go. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So as I mentioned before, I named the presentation Climate Change, Health, and Social Equity, and it's focused on a comprehensive approach to empower equity priority communities and foster sustainable urban environments. And I want to talk today a little bit about a book that I was reading and what's going to be the perspective of this presentation tonight. And I want to use a quote from a book that I was reading recently. It is possible that the next Buddha will not take the form of an individual. The next Buddha may take the form of a community practicing understanding and loving kindness, a community practicing mindful living, and this might be the most important thing we can do for the survival of Earth. The reason that I'm bringing up this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh is because I want to make sure that when we talk about climate change, we don't use an approach of despair, but bring up the things that we can actually do for our communities and empower everyone to be part of this change. So the facts that I'm counting on tonight, I know a lot of people who follow Sonoma Land Trust are excited to talk about land, are excited to talk about community building, and are excited to talk about maybe climate change. So I want to take this facts as something that I'm not gonna question, and hopefully we don't have that many questions about if climate change is real, but I am gonna take this facts as they are, and just want to bring them up before we start. Climate change is happening. Climate change is caused by human activity mostly. Scientists agree that humans are responsible for this climate change that we're facing today. Every fraction of a degree of warming actually matters for communities. The climate is changing faster than humans, plants, or animals can adapt to it. And climate change is a major threat to people's health. We can still limit climate change, and this is a positive part of the presentation tonight. So hopefully we can work together to put in practice the things that are happening. What I do want to address is the concept of climate change. I want to clarify that there's multiple definitions. I'm using the United Nations definition, which is a world organization that is actively working in climate change. And I want to say that when we're talking about climate change, we're talking about long-term changes in temperature and weather patterns around the world. We're definitely seeing them in the United States. We're definitely seeing them at our in California. We're definitely seeing them at our local communities. We're seeing them in Sonoma County and the cities that we live in. So human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels, which are mainly coal, oil, and gas. And this burning fossil fuels generate greenhouse gas emissions, and these gases act like a blanket wrap around the earth, and they trap the sun's heat and they raise temperatures. So there's a little bit of explanation in the image about the greenhouse gas effect. This doesn't mean that this effect didn't happen before we were using coal, oil, and gas. However, with human activity, we have increased the greenhouse gas effect, and temperatures are rising more than they should be rising on Earth. And that's what we're talking about when we're mentioning the term climate change. I'm not going to stop that much in that particular part because I think what we're really addressing today is connected to environmental justice, which is the term that we used when we were framing the presentation. Also, we want to know what is the connection with health and how does this affect particular groups of populations more than it affects other people. And I think the main thing that I want to bring today is climate change is one of the most pressing issues that we're facing in our time. And this is not only for developed countries. This is particularly harsh on developing countries, but that doesn't take it away from the communities that we live in. And we need to address this, thinking not just about the environment, but also about public health and social equity. If you saw the picture that I chose for the branding of this webinar, I included an activity, a picture from an activity that we hosted when I was working for the city of Santa Rosa with a really amazing partner of ours, which is Kimsing Creative, where we got feedback from people. And some of the things that we heard while we were asking about environmental justice were related to income, were related to housing. So how is this connection existing in between environmental impacts that we're seeing through climate change, health, and how does this affect social equity within the communities that we live in? Basically, as we confront rising temperatures, extreme weather events, and shifting ecosystems, we also have to understand that the climate change is not distributed equally, and equity priority communities, also known as communities of concern or vulnerable communities, are facing the most challenging part of this climate change. So to address this multifaceted crisis, we must engage in a very collaborative approach that emphasizes community involvement, strategic partnerships, thoughtful allocation of resources, and comprehensive policy making. And just to talk a little bit more about how climate change impacts human health, I want to show this California Department of Public Health image that I think is really helpful to make us understand how is climate change affecting our health. So first of all, what is climate change creating in our environment? Number one, rising temperatures. We are very aware that the heat waves have been more constant and higher every time, increasing greenhouse gas emission levels. So we have a lot of higher pollution in certain areas, and we can see that sometimes. And we know that there's alerts related to the gases that are in our environment. Rising sea levels. We know that some of the sea level rise has definitely increased, and this is causing a lot of other impacts. And fourth, but not less important, more extreme weather in general. That means hurricanes, rains, etc. And so just I want to mention the 10 things that we are talking about when we are thinking about impacts on climate change. Of course, this all includes mental health impacts in the communities that are facing this change, but I want to mention each of the things that we need to talk about when we talk about impacts of climate change. Number one, air pollution and increasing allergens. So this affects people who have asthma, allergy, cardiovascular and respiratory diseases for sure. Extreme heat. I mean, this affects us all, but heat-related illnesses really are damaging for communities, as well as deaths related to cardiovascular failure. Like this are the hardest and the most extreme parts of extreme heat. When we're talking about drought, water supply impacts, we don't have enough water for the communities that are facing this extreme weather. We face dust storms and valley fever. When we have environmental degradation, which is number 4, we have forced migration, and this is something that is already happening not only on developing countries, it's happening in the United States. We have communities that live in islands that have been forced to migrate because of the sea level rise. We also have civil conflict. We haven't faced that yet, I guess, in the United States as a climate change impact. We're seeing that in other countries, particularly when we think about some African countries that have really been challenged by the lack of resources that climate change is creating in their countries. Also, loss of jobs and income related to this environmental degradation. Wildfires and wildfire smoke. I think this is very very hard on communities, and Sonoma County is one of the most impacted counties in California. And for sure, this causes injuries, fatalities, loss of homes, cardiovascular, and respiratory diseases. In relationship to the other 5 items that I wanted to mention today, degraded living conditions and social inequities. We have a real exacerbation of racial and health inequities and vulnerabilities and loss of employment. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about this specific topic. We also have changes in vector ecology, Lyme disease, West Nile virus, hantavirus, malaria, encephalitis. We also have a hard impact on our food systems, and this includes malnutrition when there's lack of resources and food access, food insecurity, higher prices on food, and some other illnesses related. We also have severe weather and floods, and this creates definitely injuries, fatalities, loss of homes, um, mold, and other things that can be happening indoors when homes are affected. And last but not least, we also have water quality impacts, which means we have harmful algae in our waters. We have a lot of different bacteria and microorganisms living in our water that are not supposed to be there, and that pollute the water and reduce the quality of the water that we have access to. I'm going to stop here in terms of the impacts that we have in relationship to climate change that are reflected on human health. But I also want to bring up specifically, why are we addressing the term environmental justice in this webinar, and how is this connected to health and engagement with the community? So the term that we use in the United States for environmental justice provided by the Environmental Protection Agency is the just treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of income, race, color, national origin, tribal affiliation, or disability, in agency decision-making and other activities that affect human health and the environment. So now you understand why, instead of using environmental justice, I kind of wanted to use health, because I think it's a more common term that we all can understand. And this term wants to make sure of two things: that people are fully protected from disproportionate and adverse human health and environmental effects. This includes risk and hazards, including climate change, cumulative impacts of environmental and other burdens, and the legacy of racism and other structural systems or barriers. And number two, that people have access to a healthy, sustainable, and resilient environment where they can live, play, work, learn, worship, and engage in other cultural and subsistence practices. So this is the concept of environmental justice. I rarely use it when I do presentations about climate change, because I want to make things easier for communities to understand. And I think, I mean, the term we can definitely use it. I just want to make sure that when we talk about this, we're talking about protecting people from a disproportionate impact of hazards and risks that are related to the environment. And number two, that people have access to safe spaces where they can be healthy and thrive. So when we talk in the context of environmental justice, of meaningful engagement, we want to provide people with opportunities to share information and concerns, to be considered into the public input that creates decisions, to seek out and encourage the participation of persons and communities that are affected by certain activities that we're working on, ensuring that agencies offer more information of activities in a way that provides meaningful access to people, particularly people who don't speak English or are not English proficient, or people who have disabilities. These are some of the main things that we're talking about when we're talking about meaningful engagement, but also like facilitate public participation whenever it's practical and appropriate, whenever it's possible, I would say. And because we were, I'm going to stop right there because I know there's translation happening right now. I want to address the term that I used at the beginning of the presentation, which is equity priority communities. This term is used by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and it's a term that is used on our planned Bay Area. So this is very specific to the Bay Area. And in the past, they were called communities of concern or vulnerable communities. Why was this term changed? Well, basically because the focus groups and the research that was being done by different scientists and government employees was revealing that people do not like to be called vulnerable. We want to be empowered to participate and to be we like to be taking control of how we live, how we make decisions, and being called vulnerable doesn't really reflect the empowerment that people are receiving. So what the agreement was to change this term to equity priority community. So it would reflect that there is a priority being faced by these communities. It's important to address their needs. It's a priority to address their needs because they are not properly served or have been historically discriminated. So that's the reason. And so the definition that the Metropolitan Transportation Commission uses for the Plan Bay Area 2050 is census tracts that have a significant concentration of underserved populations, such as households with low incomes and people of color. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the specific methodology that is used to define equity priority communities. But this has been used since 2001 by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, MTC, and it usually used to identify communities that have historically faced disadvantage on underinvestment due to their background and their socioeconomic status. So I want to just show you what's the Plan Bay Area 2050 definition of equity priority communities. And it is, if a tract or a census tract, for people who are not familiar with what a census tract is, it's just a space that the Census Bureau uses to count population, and it's the smallest space that we can use for this type of research that the Census Bureau does. And so if that census tract exists, has two of these seven threshold values that I'm showing on the screen, people of color and low income, then the census tract is considered a census tract or an area of equity priority communities. And then if being low income, but also having other two more variables of this list, then it is also considered an equity priority community. So what does this mean? If an area has 70% of more people of color and has 28% of more people who are low income, then it's considered an area that has an equity priority community. If there's an area that has low income and any other two of the variables in this list, that would be an equity priority community. That meaning 12% of more people that have limited English proficiency, 8% of more of seniors over 75 living in the area, 15% or more people who do not own a vehicle or a car, 18% of more of single parent families, and 12% of people with disability in the area, or 14% of rent burden households. That means having to pay more than 30% of your income in rent. So this when we talk about communities that are equity priority communities that are vulnerable or disadvantaged in this particular context, this is exactly what we mean. And there's data behind it to identify why are we considering them equity priority communities. And then for people who are curious, how does this look in the Bay Area? Well, you can see Sonoma County up on the on this part of the map. That's Sonoma County, and this is the city of Santa Rosa, this is the city of Petaluma, and you can go down here toward Richmond and San Francisco, Oakland. I mean, this is a map that identifies in purple equity priority communities, and as you can see, same explanation that I provided earlier. So just to clarify, when we are speaking about these communities, what do we mean? And how does this connect to climate change and to people's health? So why are we talking about communities of color? Communities of color because of redlining. For people who are not familiar with this term, redline communities were communities that were identified as communities that did not, where the state did not want to provide home loans for people to become property owners. This happened in the 20s, and this created areas that were underinvested and people who could not create generational wealth. So that said, communities of color usually live in specific areas where there's cumulative exposure to multiple pollutants, meaning factories and places that have a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, like highways or other undesired land uses that are cumulative in communities of color. And why are we also talking about low-income communities, for example? And low-income communities are at risk of physical and mental illnesses during specific types of impacts of climate change, considering flooding or being crowded in shelter conditions. And when we are talking about comprehensive disaster management, we can improve resiliency for people with limited resources. And we have to think about this when we're doing planning for climate change. And so for other communities, for example, like children or older adults, which are included in equity priority communities, well, we know that older adults as well as kids are vulnerable to extreme events. And also, particularly in the case of seniors, they require additional support when it comes to evacuation, and they require additional help in terms of power outages in case that they are using medication or have things in their fridge that require power for them to be able to treat their diseases or treat their medical conditions. So we can talk about so many practices that are part of climate change, but are also related to how do we build community. And I mean, we can reduce risk for these communities in very different ways. And I'm not gonna spend much time right now in here because I want to just address why are we focusing on equity priority communities and why are the impacts of climate change harder on some of these communities, as I mentioned before. So talking about, I mean, this was just the framework to get now into the nitty-gritty part of like, what are the things that we actually can do locally to empower communities and to foster sustainable urban environments. And there are plenty of strategies that can be used to empower equity priority communities and the population in general, and to foster sustainable environments. However, I want to focus today on work that is related to planning and local field, particularly four things. Number one, community engagement. Number two, partnerships. Number three, funding allocation. And number four, policy, in this order. And this is a decision that I made. This is not coming from academia specifically. I mean, there's a lot of academic institutions that would say the same thing. I think the state of California and other local jurisdictions would say the same. But this is based on the experience that I have had working in the planning and the public health fields. So number one, like concept that I want to clarify, what's community engagement? Community engagement is a broad concept of how we involved people in the decision-making processes. And it can be as low as when we talk about public outreach, which means, just involving people into participating in social media, festival, open houses, exhibits, connecting with people, kind of telling them, hey, we're here. When we're talking about government specifically, for example, like just showing things that we're working on and letting people know stuff. The second part, which is more like educating the public about the things that are happening. This includes like informational sessions, seminars, webinars like the one that we're having today, creating newsletters, distributing newsletters for community members. And then we have a higher level to that, which is public input. We actually care about knowing what you think about things, and we want to know through listening sessions, through surveys, through focus groups, public meetings, what you think about the things that we are working on and that we're proposing. And there's a higher level of community engagement that is called public engagement. How do we collaborate? From the perspective of government, it's not doing only what government wants to do or what technical staff wants to do. It's participating with other residents, organizations, nonprofits, private sector on decision making and having community conversations, having advisory groups. I don't like the concept of citizen advisory groups because I think there's a lot of residents that are not citizens but are part of the community. So just want to bring that up. And then last but not impossible to reach is public decision making and empowering people to be part of this decision making. So how can we do this? There's a lot of processes where there's participatory budgeting already happening, citizen juries, delegated leadership, and decision making. These are ways to empower the community to actually be making decisions, not only relying on government aspects. So that was kind of the framework that I'm working with. So when we talk about community engagement, I think the first step that we need to address is how do we face barriers? Well, we have to identify the barriers that communities are facing to participate or to be engaged in climate change or decision making related to climate change. So the main barriers that we face, and not only for equity priority communities, and not only for climate change and health matters, are the following that I'm going to mention. They're not the only ones, but I think they apply for the majority of the work that we do throughout government. And I want to put them out there for anyone who's interested on doing community engagement. Feel free to do your own research, but you're going to find this in a lot of the spaces that you work in. Number one, technical language. And that is the main reason that I prefer sometimes not to use the term environmental justice, because I think it might mean so many things. And I really love the term, but I think it's hard to understand for a lot of people who are not deep into the topic. So I think technical language can be challenging for addressing topics related to climate change. And it can also be challenging when we're talking about government affairs, because we love using slang, government slang that nobody can understand, and it's acronyms that are only understandable for planners or engineers. And I think that's something that we can easily change when we're doing community engagement to address community needs and let people understand what we're working on. The second one is time limitations and physical locations of meetings or events that we host. When we try to organize something, think about the time and the physical location of where we host this meetings, because sometimes people cannot make it because we host them at 10 a.m. where everyone is working. And yes, we government employees that's our working time. But then we should be a little bit more flexible. Local governments, like, hear this, people cannot show up at 10 a.m., particularly if they work. So you're gonna get only people who are retired, people who are probably still studying and are free that day. You're not going to get the whole community. So it's okay to host meetings at 10 a.m., but then be able to host meetings afterwards during the weekend, in the evenings, so that more people can show up. Financial resources required to attend. I know that for a lot of people who are deep into participating in government affairs and making decisions about a lot of topics, including climate change, you're not used to think about financial resources being required to attend. But there is a lot of people, particularly low-income folks and people of color, who really struggle to be able to attend. This means paying transit fares, paying for gas, paying for daycare because nobody is able to take care of the kids. They work in a tip-based job and they cannot leave their job, or they're salary employees and they are working during working hours, among other things that can happen. So if you're going to ask someone to participate with you in an advisory group, in reviewing evaluations, doing anything that you're going to use their time, make sure that you have financial resources for those folks to attend. I know government loves to say, oh, but we can't pay people to do this because it's a voluntary activity. So guess what? You're not going to get any of the equity priority communities being part of the decision making. And what we're doing is just reproducing, excluding people from being able to make decisions in the field of climate change and environmental justice. So anyway, it's just something that I want to make really clear because I have heard so many cases of staff who cannot do this, and I am happy to say that I work for a local government that I'm really proud of that provides the resources for the community, and I think the state of California is doing a huge effort to make this same thing for the grants that we promote um, the evaluation, the participation of community and residents in the programs that we have, and paying for their life experience, for their time, for their participation. So sorry that I took so long in this topic, but I just think this is some of the barriers that we really find when communities are not able to participate in some of the things that we organize. Next but not least important is lack of cultural appropriateness of events and documents that we're providing. First of all, interpretation. Like today, we have an interpreter who is, thank you, Maria, who's interpreting what I'm saying in Spanish. So anyone can have access to this conversation, and they're recording it both in English and Spanish, so people can access it, and then everyone can join the conversation and hear what we are saying and the questions that you're going to be asking later. But that's just a piece of it. Cultural appropriateness sometimes means, for example, some folks need you to invite them to events so that they show up. Not everyone knows that city councils or community meetings or public meetings are open to everyone. There's a part where we have to like be culturally sensitive to know that some people have not participated in this spaces. So just want to bring that up. English proficiency. I was mentioning this before, and it's a really important piece for us to identify that we live in a state that has a high percentage of immigrants and people who actually lived here way before colonizers arrived, who speak other languages, and they don't need to be English proficient to participate. We need to identify ways to let people participate in other languages. The other two barriers that I frequently identify is the lack of trust in local government and in government in general, I would say. And this has many reasons, but I think three of them are more important. Number one, it's immigration status. We have a fair amount of people who are in mixed immigration status families, who are undocumented, people who have temporary visas. There's a lot of different immigration status. And because of this differences, some people might not be able to participate in certain events or would be afraid that if they show up, people are going to ask them for their social security numbers. So if you want people who are immigrants to participate confidently, that they're not going to have any backlash because of their immigration status, you need to be aware of that, and you need to tell them, you need to let them know. The second piece of it is people who have faced discrimination in the past by government, and that doesn't mean the current employees of the government that we're working for, but any type of discrimination by government would create this lack of trust. And then we have government's lack of response to their concerns. So if someone complained to government employees and then they never did something, or they never got back to them, or nobody responded to their requests, it's very common that people don't really think that government wants to participate in engaging the community. So this is something that we have to build through time, and that just yeah, the hard work of government employees that really care about community work, I think provides a lot of help. But unfortunately, all the government employees who ever interact with community members have an impact on this. So if we have government employees in this conversation, I would really like to invite you to acknowledge that you're part of this work that we can do so much better. Just acknowledging people's needs and being responsive, even when we have to say no, because we sometimes cannot provide what residents are asking for. However, that doesn't mean we cannot respond, and we can be able to connect with them and elaborate on why we can't provide what they're asking for. Last but not least, digital destitution and lack of technology savviness. We tend to do a lot of online surveys, send newsletters online and emails, and sometimes for a lot of seniors or for a lot of community members who do not have technology savviness, this is something that does not provide access to the information that we're providing or the decision making that we want to make. So anyway, just wanted to bring, I really wanted to focus on these barriers because I think these are some of the things that when we're thinking about climate change, we really have to address this because if we don't, then we're not including a fair amount of the population who could be participating in this decision making, who are actually equity priority communities. So I'm going to go faster in the next ones because I know we're getting closer to the end of this presentation. So what is the second topic that we want to talk about? Partnerships. As you probably already know, collaboration is essential in tackling climate change, and it's really associated to health risk. But building partnerships across sectors really maximizes resources and expertise. I want to talk about four types of partnerships. Number one, nonprofit organizations. Number two, academic institutions. Number three, state and local government partnerships. And number four, public-private partnerships. Nonprofit organizations, I think this is very understandable. We want nonprofits to play a role in bridging the gaps on services and resources. They usually are the ones providing technical assistance, community engagement, and advocacy support, and especially for communities that are underrepresented, those nonprofit organizations can bridge the gap in between government and residents. And so partnering with them and making the most of their expertise is really essential. Number two, academic institutions. When we talk about climate change, they are leading the research-based solutions for this work as well as for health equity. So having collaborative studies to help identify the most vulnerable populations, having health impact assessments and evaluations of effective interventions is really relevant. Number three, state and local government partnerships, partnering with the state of California, partnering with other local governments, partnering with the county. These are really relevant. Government organizations that we can partner with too, because it's not only how to partner with other types of organizations, but even within government, we don't need to work in silos. Number four, public-private partnerships. So working with the private sector, this can really drive innovation and funding for sustainable practices. And for example, cities can partner with technology firms, particularly in the Bay Area, where we have a huge amount of technology developers to get smart infrastructure, reduce any energy consumption, and enhance urban mobility, which is something that we really need in a lot of the communities that we live in. And the last piece of the topics that I wanted to address is well, there's two: funding allocation and policy framework. When talking about funding allocation, I want to say, and I've told this to Neil in previous conversations, we have to put our budget where our values are. And I think a lot of the effective climate action and health equity initiatives have to start allocating fund to it. If we're not allocating funding for the policies that we believe in, then we're just talking about them. We're not actually making them happen. So three things about funding allocation. We need targeted investment. We need to invest in the communities that require the largest amount of resources to build infrastructure, public transportation, and renewable energy. We really should prioritize specific areas, and that's where we're talking about equity priority communities, because they need the support more and because they're going to be affected by climate change in a more inequitable way. Number two, leveraging using grant programs. So 1 second, I'm just gonna, I think my audio is not working well. 1 second. I apologize for that. I was hearing an echo. I hope you can hear me well.
It sounds great, Beatrice.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Neil. The second point that I want to make about funding allocation, I wanted to talk about grant programs. So establishing programs that can support local initiatives is a fantastic way of creating partnerships, involving the community, providing nonprofits with the right resources to develop innovative solutions. So funding should be accessible and with a clear criteria to emphasize equity and sustainability. If there's any government employees in here, I would highly suggest to take advantage of what the state of California is providing in terms of climate change. We have a ton of programs that are providing funding for equity priority communities, and we should definitely take advantage of that. But also nonprofits and organizations, if you're hearing me and you're interested in climate change, there's a lot of resources that you can also access through state grants. So pay attention to that because that's something that the state of California is prioritizing. Number three, how do we do this in a way that is equitable? Equitable distribution is relevant for funding decisions, and we need to make them in a transparent way and in an equitable way. This really means engaging community members in the decision making of this budget distribution. And I want to say, for example, like making decisions about budget in remote locations where people cannot come to, or in a closed session, that is not really equitable distribution of resources. Accountability of resources has to be made in a space where like people can access remotely, people can come in and provide input on. And we really need to force our elected officials to go through this route of equitable distribution, but also transparent distribution of resources. And I want to close the conversation about how we address climate change and health equity through different strategies at a local level with policy framework. So effective policy for fostering sustainable urban environments and empowering communities should follow four things that we really think about. Number one, inclusive policy development. Getting input from community members to create this policy is really important, especially from equity priority communities or equity priority groups. And participatory governance is really relevant to incorporate like this diverse voices in the decision-making process. Health and climate nexus. When we talk about climate change, we need to think about health. There's no way to exclude the connection in between these two topics. And for example, urban planning regulation should really take into account how health is affected in communities. And for example, like green spaces to enhance mental and physical health, and also the benefits that are provided to the community cannot be separated. This is something that goes together. Number three, having regulatory frameworks. Like we need to have strong frameworks that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and promote sustainable practices. I guess this is pretty obvious, but sometimes we do not really focus on how do we make regulation that can help us with the core of the work related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And this policy should also be able to support renewable energy, efficient public transportation and mobility, as well as green infrastructure. And number four, long-term commitments. Climate change is a long-term challenge. We're not going to solve it today. It has started since a long time, since we started burning fossil fuels. So we require sustained political will and funding. It's not going to be solved with this city council, federal administration, or board of supervisors. We need long-term commitments. So policymakers have to commit to ongoing assessments, to practice which policies are working well, adjust them if they're not, ensuring that they remain effective in facing the evolving challenges that we're going to be living with through climate change throughout the next years. And I'm going to skip a couple of the slides that I have, but if you leave, maybe not this one, if you live in Sonoma County, or if you live in Santa Rosa, you have a huge opportunity right now to be seeing what's being done in terms of environmental justice elements in your general plans. So if you're curious about that, be in contact with your planning departments and ask them about the environmental justice elements that they just have been working on. There's a lot of information provided by them. They're fantastic teams. Take advantage of that. They're incredible planners in those planning departments. So ask them to involve you in the process and to show them what they have and be involved on seeing what is being written in the EJ elements of your jurisdiction. And if you don't live in Sonoma County, go and check what your other local governments are doing. Every time that you update your general plan, two or more elements, you're supposed to update your environmental justice element. So that's an opportunity that you have just out of like the timeline that we're living through right now in Sonoma County and in general in the state of California. So go ahead and get involved in what your local jurisdiction is doing. And please keep in mind that this work is a collective work. We cannot do it together. Addressing climate change through the lens of health and social equity requires a really comprehensive collaborative approach. And by prioritizing community involvement, building strategic partnerships, and ensuring equitable funding allocation, we can develop inclusive policies and we can empower equity priority communities to foster sustainable urban environments. And this holistic strategy does not address only environmental immediate change or health challenges, but also builds the foundation of a most just and resilient future for all. And in conclusion, let's just recognize that the fight against climate change is also a fight for social justice. And by working together, we can really create communities that not only survive the impacts of climate change, but that thrive in the face of it.